So yeah, thanks everyone so far for all the interviews you've done and participating. We've had a few teething problems reaching out to some people, and that'll be one of the first things we talk about. But maybe before that, we have a few new people. So John has joined us as a person with lived experience. Louise is here as a practitioner, and we also have Audrey who's covering for Alice, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, if I was just wondering if you guys could just introduce yourselves very briefly. Just tell us, in the first meeting, we sort of said who we were, maybe what our interest was in the project, just 30 seconds or something like that. If that's all right, John, could you kick us off, please?
Sure, absolutely. Career soldier, was a Royal Marine for 23 years. Came out of the forces, everything was fine, had a decent life, lost my wife, went in a bit of a downward spiral, finished up being sent to prison, came back out, my life had evaporated, and I'm trying to rebuild it from scratch, which is not particularly easy. And that's where I am at the moment, finding a lot of people sort of dictating to what we should be doing, and not really being heard. And that was my interest in the project, was that, collating some grassroots experience and actually having that fed back to the power brokers, if you like, so that they're making more informed decisions. That means quite a lot to me. That was my interest in the project.
Super, thanks. Well, that's what we're trying to do. Audrey?
Hello there. Yeah, my name's Audrey. I'm the administrator at People Know How, and I've also had experience of working in the voluntary sector before for about 12 years, working in various communities in Edinburgh. And I'm interested in this project. Obviously, I've had experience of working with people that, don't have a lot of money, don't have a lot of opportunities, and looking at how their voices, as John said there, can be heard and help to shape sort of resources and services for them in their own communities.
Thanks very much. And Louise?
Hi, my name is Louise. I am a Community Food and Health Development Officer at Edinburgh Community Food. So we work with lots and lots of different groups of people in schools, community centres, that kind of thing. I do a lot of work with women who have come out of prison and who are also looking to rebuild their life. And yeah, I was kind of interested in the project for the same reasons. Sarah kind of Audrey said what I would say, just kind of being able to advocate and be a voice for people. Yeah, nice to meet everyone.
Great. Okay, thanks very much. I'm just going to share my screen because I have got some slides, mostly so that I don't forget what I'm going to say. I'm running on very little sleep, and so some of these aren't my most. The Zoom screen sharing is much more complicated than I remember these things. Okay. Can everyone see my screen? Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks. Yeah, these aren't my most beautiful slides. They're just going to be a lot of text, but hopefully they'll keep the conversation going. So yeah, as I said, thanks everyone for sending me your interviews so far. Notes, recordings, whatever, it's all good. I've tried to distill as much as I can from those conversations into a summary. So we'll just start with me kind of yapping for 10 minutes about what I've learned. And hopefully in that way, you'll get a sense for what other people have said in their conversations with each other. And then we'll have an opportunity to have a kind of brainstorm as a group about what my summary is missing. So what I need to add in there extra, and really don't feel like my summary is sacrosanct in any way. Like, I'm obviously fallible and I'll have missed stuff that other people think is really important. And then we'll have an opportunity to talk about what we want to do next. So we should have kind of 2 or 3 rounds of these interviews. And ultimately, we want to produce a document that talks about what we've learned and what we think the implications are for the charities involved, and maybe for some campaigning work that we might do. So we can discuss that when we get there. Just before that, maybe. So as I flagged already, I think I've really underestimated the extent of digital exclusion. So that's something I'm learning a lot in this project. And I think particularly some of the people with lived experience have been struggling with the Zoom meetings side of things, and also struggling with the consent forms. I don't know if anyone's really had that experience. So that's kind of out of my control. My university insists on these data privacy consent forms that are extremely legalistic and I think kind of intimidating and overwhelming to people who are a bit suspicious of that sort of stuff anyway. So I will pass that back to my ethics committee. I have done that a few times already. But yeah, in any case, I think it might be helpful if we move to phone calls, or at least make phone calls definitely an option. So I've updated the spreadsheet that I hope everyone has access to. If you don't have access to it, please email me. I've updated the contact details at the bottom with the phone numbers for some of the people that we haven't really been able to reach. And I'll put everyone's phone numbers on there in due course, like today or Monday, as soon as I organise them. And then if you do find it easier to reach someone by phone, just have the conversation by phone. So I think we've already had a few phone conversations. Hugh and I had a chat on the phone on WhatsApp video call last week, I think. Got some great notes out of that. And then you can just send me the notes. And in some way, that's actually easier for me than listening to a 1 hour conversation and trying to figure it out. So yeah, that's totally fine. And hopefully that way we can reach some more people. Does anyone have any thoughts or reactions to that or anything that I should think about?
No, I mean, I know from my own experience that it's not been easy to be included digitally. We had a sort of email back and forth on the subject this morning, and I am sitting in Edinburgh City Library at the moment on public Wi-Fi in the halls. So, not ideal.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. One thing that did come up was that I was trying to reach one of the other people with lived experience through someone at one of the food banks, and they said that they don't answer their emails or their phones, so I have to wait for them to come into the knitting club. So yeah, if we run into problems like that, we'll see what we can do. But at the moment, I'm just going to try to include people a bit more and just broaden the scope of what we can do. All right, so if there's no other thoughts on that, I'll just kick on. I'll just have a quick look if anyone's got. Oh, okay. Right, so let me start talking about some themes. If you have an interjection, try to raise your hand or just yell over the audio because I can't see everyone's faces simultaneously. But otherwise, hopefully I can get through this in about 10 or 15 minutes and then we can just have a yarn. All right, so the first kind of, I think to my mind, quite encouraging thing is that people seem to think the thriving model with the tree and the means and the process and the outcomes is broadly good. So the Edinburgh situation is not so different from the UK national situation that we need to develop a whole new model. So we can sort of, in a sense, take that as read. There were a few comments on what was missing from it or how it could be improved maybe. So one was that it's a bit optimistic. So it doesn't really talk about downward pressures, and in particular, it doesn't talk about barriers. So we're in the model, in the full report, we talk about support and how important support is, particularly people to help you navigate the welfare system. But that's not really in the tree model explicitly, that there's a lot of stuff that's keeping you down, and that getting out of that is a big part of it. Could also have a bit more of an emphasis on constraints. So I heard this in an interview between Will and Patricia, I think, but it comes from some other conversation that a tree can grow in a box, but it won't get very big. So we also want to think about how much people are kind of constrained into a smaller space than they could potentially expand into if they were given more opportunities. The big one, and I think hopefully what this project is all about, is that the model is a useful kind of starting point. A lot of people commented on how simple it is and it's kind of visually attractive and it communicates a lot very quickly, but that it does need to be adapted to a particular person and their circumstances, and I think in our case as well, a particular place. So Edinburgh and what's peculiar about Edinburgh, and I have that on the next slide. The other point is that maybe it could be a little bit more hierarchical, particularly in emphasising that basic needs are really the most important thing, and the process and the outcomes really come after that. So if we don't get the basic needs sorted, we're cooked. And I think, again, we do say that in the report, but it's not there visually in the model. Okay, if you have anything to add on any of these points and you want to wait till the end, just take a note and we'll have plenty of opportunities to chat. So, oh, sorry, let me go into my slide deck so it's a bit easier to follow. I think the main thing that's come out in the conversations and in the fieldwork that Liana and I did about 6 weeks ago now is that housing is the biggest thing causing poverty, basically, in Edinburgh. Housing is really expensive. There's not enough of it. It's in bad shape a lot of the time. Getting a council flat takes forever. Just applying for it takes forever. The EdIndex website is not good if you're digitally excluded, and it's generally a pretty ugly and hard to use website. I was talking to the head of digital for People Know How this morning, and he said even he sometimes doesn't know how to log into it. So obviously that's like a bit of an issue. That's quite a structural factor, and we'll talk about that in a bit. People also talk a lot about how poverty is tucked away and hidden in Edinburgh, and that the places that are in poverty have been like that for a very long time. So the intergenerational poverty element where people don't know any other way of living, they're not really exposed to alternate lifestyles, they can't really imagine how to get themselves out of their circumstances. And I think that's perhaps a big role for the support that I'm going to talk about in a moment. Transport is good. That's one of the kind of high points, is that there are trams and buses and things like that. And they generally cover most of the city and they're pretty affordable. But people have mentioned that, particularly for some older citizens, the system can actually be confusing because there's so much going on. And also that the costs can add up. So it's fairly affordable, but potentially could be even more affordable. One theme that keeps recurring that I do want to underline is that there's no cheap entertainment options, and that this really seems to be an issue for a lot of people in poverty, particularly people who are in chronic poverty, is that they say their lives are very mundane. Nothing really interesting happens, and there's no kind of excitement or anything to look forward to. And then, there's been some discussions about how the community centres are really underfunded and they don't really have the kind of facilities that would allow for entertainment. But then also that there are some facilities that are underused. Maybe I heard of some big sports club or something that people aren't going to as much as maybe they could be going to. Yeah, here's my point that community centres are badly underfunded. I heard this directly from the directors of the community centres, that they feel like there's been cuts coming down from the council for at least a decade, if not longer, and there's more cuts in the pipeline, and so they're struggling just to run their like absolutely basic services, and they've had to make cuts to a lot of programs, especially the programs for kids, and that then leads to kind of bigger problems down the line. I think an additional point here that was raised that I thought was quite powerful is that if you're already struggling with depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, lack of confidence, this kind of stuff, and you feel like the DWP or the government systems and these kind of things are kind of unfriendly and mean and they don't trust you, then going into one of these community centres to look for help when the community centre itself looks a bit sad and dejected can sort of further compound the feeling that society doesn't care about you, even if the people there really do try their best to help. There were some differences of opinion. Like one person with lived experience said that they felt like there was quite good community infrastructure in Edinburgh, and that their people that they knew in other parts of the UK didn't have access to as much. But then there was also a lot of a different chat where it seemed that Wales was much more impressive in terms of how much community infrastructure there was in Wales, how much more accessible that was, that sort of thing. So I think something that really sets the background for a lot of the work that we're doing here is that the poverty in Edinburgh does seem to be very structural. So what I mean by that is that it's out of control of the individual people. So we hear often this narrative of it's a matter of personal responsibility and poverty is a personal failing. And I will talk about the idea of teaching a man to fish, which came up a lot, or teaching a woman to fish, or a non-binary person or whatever, in a moment. But it does seem like there are just a lot of structural factors. So housing is the one that I already mentioned. I also already mentioned that the DWP and generally the kind of state architecture for getting people crisis grants, getting people social housing, these kind of things is generally quite mean. It's kind of miserly, so it makes you put in a lot of paperwork to get a £7 crisis grant, which was a shockingly small amount of money to me. It's generally distrustful of people, so it wants a lot of evidence of their disabilities and their poorness and this kind of stuff, and that's quite dehumanizing to kind of have to prove really hard that you're poor and suffering. And then there was a lot of commentary that really it seems like these institutions of the state just don't want to help. Like they're deliberately making it difficult to apply because they want to get people off the books, and that seems to be working in the sense that a lot of people aren't turning to get help even though they need it because they can't be bothered dealing with how kind of onerous this process is. Yeah, there's a lot of paperwork and barriers to help. The common complaint was that there's a lack of what academics call joined up government. So the police service doesn't talk to the job centres, doesn't talk to the social workers, doesn't talk to the NHS. And so every time you go for help, you have to explain your situation all over again. The paperwork isn't passed across these different groups. And that means that you're just wasting a lot of time with paperwork and repeating yourself. And that when you go to each of these services, because they're not talking to each other, they don't seem to have a plan. So there's sort of like pretty common clusters of people that turn up in this space. You've got people who've come out of prison, people who've got gambling issues, people who are recent migrants, etc. Like kind of some clusters of people that have similar issues, and it seems that a lot of these organizations, like the job centers, should have like a cookbook for, oh, you've come in with these issues, we've seen this sort of thing before, here's kind of what we'd recommend as a first step, and then we can try to work out your particular circumstances within that. And there doesn't seem to be any of this kind of wisdom accruing in these institutions, which seems really just a kind of a waste. Yeah, digital exclusion is often structural in the sense that like you have to communicate with the job centre online, and a lot of people just don't have access to that kind of online stuff. I've been very struck, I guess, that in talking to some of the people in the digital groups that People Know How runs, that people can get the devices, get online, but they're very uncomfortable with it. Even when they've got the help, they really prefer not to do it that way. And they don't see, say, this group as an opportunity to practice their digital skills. They really just only want to do the digital as much as is strictly necessary. So that's part of why we're trying to move to the phones as well. As I said, really deep cuts to the council. And then I think the question that comes up for us is sort of our charity partners who are involved in this project, like how can we inform those charities about what are useful ways to operate and help people within these broader stories. Another big thing that came up for me, particularly in the field work, is that Edinburgh's poverty is very chronic. So a lot of the people in poverty are stuck. This comes up when I speak to practitioners, especially at all the charities I've spoken to. So I'll just give you one example of a woman I spoke to at the food bank. So she was a full-time carer for her husband who had late-stage cancer. I think they had 2 kids, but maybe 3. And she was working 15 hours a week as a carer, but a fairly high-skilled carer. So she was earning reasonable money from that, but 15 hours a week is just not enough to support that many people. So they're dependent on benefits. The benefits aren't enough. They're really like breadline. And so they're also dependent on a food bank. And this is one of the people that said that she can't see any way out of this until like the kids graduate and her husband is in a different situation. And so this is like, they're stuck. So I don't see a kind of transformative potential here for the Turn to Us Transformation Fund. Then there's a question of, do any of our charity partners want to think about improving the quality of life of people in this kind of chronic circumstance, and what would do that? So one thing that gets mentioned a lot, as I said, is entertainment options, and whether there's any way for, say, the community centres to do that. or to provide grants for things like, a lot of people have said that you can get out to the nature quite easily in Scotland just on the bus. So if you have a tent, you can actually kind of take yourself camping, and that's a sort of cheap way to have a bit of fun, get back to nature, kind of ground yourself. A lot of people talked about holidays or just respite care from having some childcare or something, just to have a day to yourself. And generally stuff for kids, like not being able to afford toys, not being able to afford new shoes, anything like that. And then another common theme in this more chronic situation is housing improvements. So getting some new furniture that's not quite so tatty, putting carpets down, getting some new curtains, being able to paint one of the walls, something like that would really improve someone's quality of life, but it wouldn't necessarily like transform their situation. I've been struck that two of the groups that come up that do seem to often have at least a real will to change their circumstances, if not a plan for that, are recent migrants, particularly from overseas, and people who have recently come out of prison. This then brings me to this theme that's come up a lot, and I think you hear it a lot in poverty policy, is teaching, don't give a man a fish, teach a man to fish. I think we all get what this is about. So we have to try to give people the means to transform their situation. One way this was expressed in an interview was £1,000 of support is probably more valuable than £1,000 of cash. So cash is often then going to be splurged on things that you've been missing. At the same time, I heard from a lot of other people, particularly practitioners, that should be fine. Like, we shouldn't necessarily judge people who've been very deprived for, 6 to 12 months or whatever, that they want to go out to the pub for a meal or something instead of eating canned food again. And that, as part of treating people humanely and with respect, we should be open to giving them some money for that kind of thing. Nonetheless, that support is really the key, and kind of long-term strategic support, what's sometimes called wraparound services by academics. So a kind of coach almost who says, what do you need this week? Do you need help with medical expenses? Do you need childcare? Do you need help finding a job? Do you need help looking for skills? Whatever it might be, week to week or month to month, until that person's kind of managed to get themselves independent. Financial planning was definitely mentioned a lot, like how to leverage the small amount that you've got and compound it into something a bit better. And so, it does seem to be that coaching is quite important, particularly coaching through the welfare system, but also more generally having a community and then the networks that arise of that community, and people find out about job opportunities, or people find out about places where they might be able to volunteer and learn some skills that they can turn into job opportunities. And that if those kind of networks are thin, then that makes it difficult for people to exit poverty. And that's a really big theme of the academic literature on poverty, I have to say. Particularly Hilary Cottam's Radical Help is basically all about. But then there's also a very big emphasis, I'd say it's one of the main themes really, that friendship and just kind of general warmth from people is really important to both quality of life within poverty and also to trying to get out of it. So friendship, esteem, just generally feeling cared for rather than spat on is quite important, and that giving these kind of all the goodwilled people in community centres and places like that support so they can offer this to other people and not feel drained is really important. One thing that came up in, I think, my Hughes conversations especially, was that there are people around called money advice or something like that, who are there to sort of help people with this kind of coaching, and that at least the person Hugh knows is really good and does actually really try to help people. But there are a lot of people are very skeptical of this money advice stuff. They're worried that they'll have their benefits docked because they'll turn out to be making too much money. They're also a bit embarrassed about trying to show someone how much money they don't have. And that people who generally think of the money advice people as like an arm of the DWP. And because the government is so kind of mean and nasty, They don't really trust the money advice people to be friendly. And that seems to me like a really bad situation. And I don't know how we could maybe go about fixing that. So I think that brings me broadly to the end of my summary. I think there were other things that I could talk about, but those were kind of really the big stuff that was coming out for me. So I think maybe the first question I have is, what have I missed? Or what other nuances do people want to add on? And then we can have a conversation about where we want to take our research next. So does anyone have any reactions, any comments? Feel free to have a think about it for a bit. I'll just be moving up and down the sheet.
Certainly, my experience and the experience of other people I know regarding housing and work, those are a problem here. As I mentioned, I'm in a homeless hostel at the moment. That's actually quite a barrier to getting work and getting myself out of that situation. Basically, I'm being forced to sit here and wait until the council hands me a house 2 years down the line, instead of being able to earn money and perhaps go private rent or something and solve the problem myself. In actual fact, I've managed to overcome that, but it's not been easy. If you get a job and you're in a homeless hostel, you immediately start paying rent. And in a lot of cases, that rent is at least as much, if not more, than it would actually cost you to rent a flat in the same council flat in the same house. I'm paying £125 for a room in a homeless hostel that's pretty tatty. It's got a shared bathroom. It's got a shared kitchen. And I'm paying more than I was paying for a high-rise flat out in the town before I became homeless. And that's obviously a huge barrier. A lot of people just don't look for work. And of course, the problem with that is balancing not really looking for work and actually finding it, which would put you in a financial bind while still maintaining to the DWP that, no, I'm definitely looking for work. Please don't stop my money. And that becomes sort of, it makes people the enemy then. It makes the council the enemy. It makes the DWP the enemy. And you're less likely to go to your enemies for help. You know, people that you view in a negative sense. There's also the issue that certainly my experience across Edinburgh is that most of these hostels have curfews. I can't physically get out of my building before 7 AM and I can't get back in after 11 PM. Now, my job doesn't involve those hours. I can actually work within that, which I'm very fortunate. But most of the work that the kind of people I'm talking to are looking for, they're cleaning jobs, they're kitchen porter jobs, they're bar jobs. And those don't work with that curfew. You just can't do them because you're going home after 12 o'clock and you're locked out all night. Or you can't leave early enough in the morning to be at work for when you're supposed to be there. So again, those two things don't work together. And it was what I was speaking to Nicholas about, a bit of conversation between those two people, you know, the council and running these things and the DWP, just a bit of common sense talk between them might come up with a solution that solves the problem for an awful lot of people who are finding themselves in that situation.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I found that really powerful. I listened to your conversation this morning and I was like, yeah, that just sounds like such a brain dead situation. What's the motivation of the hostel, or what's the reasoning that they give for having the curfew?
Security. Simply, there's managers who are on site who are responsible for the security. Obviously, you've got people with alcohol issues, and you know these places have got, most of the people in there, myself included, have issues around their lives that maybe doesn't make them the best tenants in the world, and I can understand that. And so there's a manager on site, and obviously that person needs to be able to go to bed at some point and have a life of their own. And that period is when basically the place is locked down and it's secure. And that manager person is essentially, that's their off time. And it's to preserve that. Yeah,
nice. Okay. Well, I might try to talk to some of the homeless doctors about their attitudes. It would be interesting to get their perspective as well. Any other comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment about the this idea around the support and cash and this sort of you know, kind of binary that was a little bit set up there, and then also related to housing, and also whether actually there, you know, one of the questions that we were prepped with for the interview is think about, you know, how much money would really help somebody in this, you know, get out of poverty. And, you know, maybe the question is basically the rent for the flat for the year, you know, and that can be, you know, and that's, I mean, that's pushing, almost £10,000 a year. But actually that's the figure it's probably going to take to really help people longer term and give them some stability. And so then it's sort of partly support, but partly trying to get this unsolvable structural problem. But then also it's still money up front. It's still, you know, sort of money going to the bank. So I think I kind of wanted to reiterate that. But then I was also thinking, I don't really know if any of the, for example, Turntiles are able to provide this, but, you know, one of the hardest issues trying to get a flat will be that if you're on benefits or you don't have a job, the private rental market aren't going to give you a flat because there's not. And whether, I don't know if this actually does happen, but whether, for example, Turntiles can act as guarantors on renting apartments and this type of thing. So I think that's kind of related. The housing is a big problem and it's very expensive, but it's not quite. It's unsolvable as a structural problem, but maybe not as an individual problem. It might just take a lot of money.
There's actually a cap on how much housing benefit you can claim. And even some of the council properties take you very close to that cap. So most private landlords will be charging way over that. And basically, if they give it to someone who's on benefit, they're not going to get paid the money that they're asking for that flat. They're going to get a portion of it. And why do that when you can get somebody to take it on for the full amount? It's just economics. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, good thoughts. I'm talking to a lot of people from Turn to Us. So I have already, but a few more people this week. So I'll pass that on. I'll ask them what they think about that, and people know how as well. Any other thoughts or reactions from you?
Again, the inclusivity. Again, I expressed my interest in this was, you know, being heard, you know, and understanding that people are actually taking some notice of what people are saying. If you've been asked about something, even if what you've said isn't really taken into account in the final solution, the fact that you've been involved in the process makes you far more likely to take part in what that solution is. And I think that's a big part of it. Most of the people who are in this situation feel invisible, and to a large extent they are. Most people, I think individuals within these companies, and most of the people I meet in the DWP and people I've met through housing as individuals, they're nice people and they seem genuinely invested in helping you. But the organisation itself really works against that because of how they're constrained and what they can do, what they can offer, how they have to work. And, you know, a concerted across the board look at that and how all that ties together is really where they need to go next, I think.
Yeah, I think this is one of the most consistent messages you get from frontline workers is that they became social workers, for example, to help people, and they feel like they're just perpetuating all the harms of the system because they're kind of trapped in these bad systems. Yeah, that's fair. All right, well, if that kind of brings us neatly, I guess, to the next slide, which is sort of where we want to go next. So on the one hand, I'm aware that this project is kind of motivated by Turn to Us's desire to make this future fund that they have effective. But we also wanted some of the intel from here to feed into the Coalition Against Poverty in Edinburgh, which is a kind of coordination group for a lot of the charities working on this stuff. I'm conscious that the Edinburgh Poverty Truth Commission happened quite recently and did unearth a lot of the same things that we're unearthing. So I don't want to just duplicate what they did on a smaller scale because that was a very, very big operation. So I'm tempted to say that I would like to take this more towards what would be helpful for Turn to Us, People Know How, and particularly the sort of food banks and Louise, I know you don't work at a food bank. Yeah, it's a charity related to like cooking and nutrition and things like that, but more these kind of organizations. So trying to be helpful to them. At the same time, it does seem to me like there's an aspect of helping individual people in financial hardship in Edinburgh, but then also informing campaigning work or any kind of lobbying that might be going on, because a lot of what's coming out of it is, for example, the co-production, getting people with lived experience involved is very useful. And in talking to some of the people that Turn to Us and People Know How, there does seem to be a lot of system change work that needs to go on, even within the charities sector, to kind of take that sort of thing more seriously and move away from, I dare say, these slightly more Victorian notions of like the deserving and undeserving poor, and like charity is something that you do to people and you don't really consult them about what would be helpful, that sort of stuff. So yeah, I've kind of sketched a few ideas here about what we could investigate. So we had this initial question in round one about like, if you had some amount of money, what would be most transformative? What sort of amounts of money are we talking about? We've unearthed a bunch of stuff that's more relevant for kind of campaigning and lobbying. Is there much scope for that? Like trying to get the community centres better funded so this entertainment stuff is available. If we want to go down that road, then maybe we want to investigate like what stuff should the community centres really be funded to offer? Like, is it childcare? Is it after school sports? Is it like getting a bus to take people into the countryside for a day? That sort of thing. Yeah, so anyway, does anyone have any thoughts on kind of where they want this research to go next? I want to try to keep the project open for everyone's research interest, not just my own.
I think there's a lot of interest in getting things up and running, sort of everything from cookery classes, music classes, and having people included, feeling part of the community and not being isolated is a big part of that kind of poverty. It's not just financial poverty, it's poverty in a lot of different things, connection and inclusivity. It did strike me the other day that, being that I live in the centre of Edinburgh at the moment, during the festival and during the Fringe, suddenly thousands of small spaces open up their doors for theatre groups and everything else, and then they promptly vanish at the end of August. Why can't we sort of source some of these places that open their doors to a theatre group to see if they fancy running a workshop or an advice centre or something, and finding space to do stuff that we could do ourselves? You get a load of like-minded people. I play a lot of instruments. A couple of other people who go to the People Know How group that we go to also play various instruments, different ones to me. I'd be quite happy to go along and teach some people some of that as entertainment, a bit of fun for free. It's finding space to do it that's difficult.
Yeah, nice. Okay. Cool.
I'm just going to add to that. Sorry.
Mm.
We've had that exact conversation, John, about how
Yes.
it's great in the festival, but then where do they go? We've literally had that conversation at work not that long ago. We really struggle to find venues for our, so we don't have cooking facilities at our warehouse.
Sure.
And we struggle to find spaces that will welcome us in and allow us to bring people in, do cooking together, sit down and eat the food, or do a little bit of an activity or whatever. And so for us, we're looking for cooking spaces, but yeah, like you say, there's lots of other activities that will need specific spaces kind of thing as well. So I think for me, a big thing is like local community centres and places like that being more more welcoming, and that they're not so like, because some of the centres I've been into are very like cliquey. So like the same people will use them, and if you go in and you don't know, you know, you're just going in to say hello kind of thing, you're like I'm not supposed to be here. So yeah, I think for me that's a big one anyway, is more space.
Yeah, great.
So us at Edinburgh Food Project, we are so fortunate because we've got an amazing space. at the Thistle Foundation, and me and Hugh were just talking about well, yeah, absolutely, spaces. We're very fortunate to find this. It was quite amazing that we were able to, because when we were looking for it, there was nothing to be found. But what we were sort of saying earlier was, well, there's lots of kind of groups that go on. It's like, how do we get people to know about it? That's the only thing. That's definitely a big barrier. We've got quite a lot of stuff going on, but the sort of engagement and attendance is like quite low sometimes, and it's not that there isn't the need. It's just how do we get people?
Mark, there's just not enough information, you know. People are, you know, didn't get pointed in the right direction when they're looking for things. And it's that's what it is. People, they just don't know. They don't know where to go, you know. And I mean, there is places, but you just need, I don't know how you get in touch with them, but you need to be in touch with these people that know where to go.
Yeah. That's probably a digital exclusion thing a bit as well, with the collapse of all the local newspapers and that sort of thing, that it's like, where's the message board or whatever? And if you're excluded and you're lonely and you're isolated, you don't have word of mouth as a way to get help either. Okay, that's good. Yeah.
But then again, I mean, surely the council could probably provide something that could go to DWP offices. Most people who are in that situation are going to go there at least once a week or once a fortnight. Homeless shelters, there's no information. There's a notice board in the place where I live. There's nothing on it.
Right.
Nothing at all.
Okay. All right. So those are good research questions. How do we get the word out about what already exists? Yeah, any other?
I think what I was going to say is also a question of getting the word out, and also people feeling like they have a right to these places, that they belong in these places, and that they have a connection to that. When we were speaking earlier about the fact that we know these local spaces exist, they open their doors for the fringe, for kind of the outside, for the tourists, but actually do people who are living in Edinburgh feel like they have a right to occupy those places as well? And like, it's not just for other people, that people should feel kind of empowered to use those spaces and go to them, because as well, we might be able to get the word out, which is one barrier, but then also feel people feeling empowered that they can go to those places and that they are welcome to go to those places too.
Oh, nice. Julia, did you have something?
Yeah, it's just a sort of thought in terms of direction of investigation as I'm sort of listening to this and some of the interviews I did as well. It seems to me that it's quite important to look into what are these enablers and connectors across different domains. So I was really happy to see, Mark, how you included kind of the importance of individuals in enabling how support is accessed. And it's kind of this idea of like, yeah, the middleman in all of these in different situations. Who is the middleman? So I know in some of the interviews I had, it was people were pointing out that what was quite helpful in many situations was that kind of middleman who had been there himself, middleman, middlewoman, who had been there himself, been there herself in the situations, and they were kind of the enabling link, or the connecting link between something happening and the difference between something sort of going forward and not going forward. So that, you know, between being made to feel welcome and not being made to feel welcome, that kind of middleman or middlewoman, or that, and so that's in terms of individuals, but then also like Leon has just said, and like John's been talking, and Hugh as well, about that enabling place, or that connecting space, or how do you find out about things, how do you find out about what's going on. So yeah, I see this as kind of a enabling or connecting kind of puzzle or link, you know, what's stopping the different connections being, and like you said as well, across even across different organizations, like how do we link these things up better? And so yeah, enabling and connecting.
Yeah, nice.
How could we help people connect? Is there, I think that sounds like a really great point. And yeah, what would help link people up with others who've navigated a centre or a service effectively, is there anything that can be done for that?
It's like an advocate, isn't it? It's like having someone
Mhm.
trusted that you trust, who will then go forward on your behalf to speak to the people you don't particularly trust or are a little afraid of, or you don't feel that you're able to speak to them on their level. You can go to this advocate, they go either with you or for you, and form that bridge. And then you can pick up the conversation yourself once the introduction and the hard part is done, if you like.
Mhm. I think this is in many ways the raison d'etre of People Know How, right? Is that you're trying to act as a signposting service between a lot of different things that are available. Have I broadly got that right, Nicholas and Audrey? Yeah.
Yes, and I mean, just listening to people, how much of a theme digital inclusion is a big part of that. So during our conversation with John, you were saying that in the homeless accommodation you're in, there's no Wi-Fi. So a lot of the residents end up having to go, like yourself, to the library to be able to read their emails, respond to questions about their benefits, fill out online forms, etc. And they're not always able to do that because of the curfew. And when they get messages late in the day, they don't read them until the next time they're in the library, and then they pass deadlines and they get penalized by the benefit system, etc. So I think it just emphasizes how much of a role sort of digital inclusion plays in all of these issues. It's one of it's not the main cause by any means, but it's certainly a big factor when you're talking about a solution to poverty. You have to include digital inclusion in there somewhere, because there's
The thing is, I don't. Sorry.
Go on.
Sorry, I was going to say. I mean, I don't know how difficult it would be. I mean, why can't they run the library? Clearly has a fairly robust Wi-Fi service. Shouldn't that be available in all council offices? So you can walk in and use a meeting room, or where we go in the cranny and the social hubs, and yeah, in homeless shelters, in refugees, and all these kind of places. What's wrong with them supplying the same kind of service as they supply in the library? How expensive would that be? The infrastructure is really already there. There is Wi-Fi in the building I'm in, but it's restricted to use for the staff. The one member of staff, but we can't get access to it. We're not allowed.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that seems very solvable. You can even set up a sub network on the one connection.
Well, yeah.
And when you're talking about supporting people with costs, I mean, there's ongoing costs when it comes to being digitally included, with buying your device, paying for ongoing connectivity, and increasingly the drivers for poverty reduction are all going online. So whether that's employment, cost of living, income from social security benefits, etc., Ed Index that you mentioned earlier. So how do people have access to these services unless they have a device, the skills and knowledge to be able to use that device, the help with costs to enable them to be connected, and so on?
Okay, well, I'm getting some good research questions together. Any other thoughts on what we should be investigating? Or did you want to come in there at all? I know you did.
No, at the moment. Sorry, Mark.
That's all right. No problem. I'm just making sure everyone gets the chance to talk.
One small thing on the housing side of things, actually. You mentioned yourself that the Index isn't particularly helpful. It's not the world's greatest website. The lack of transparency is worrying. Is that you've no idea whether you're advancing, whether you're getting any closer to the front of the queue. You bid every week, and you either get a call to say you've got a house or you don't, and that's all the information you get. There's no guidance as to you're bidding for the wrong kind of property. If you keep bidding for those, it's going to take you longer. If you bid for this kind of property, you've got more chance. There's none of that feedback, and you used to be able to get it when they were doing it on paper. Actually, you got the little newspaper thing with the houses, and you tick the boxes and put the tear off slip in the box at the council office, and you would actually get information back to say, yeah, you were 14th on the list for such and such a property, and you would have an idea of how your bidding strategy was working, where you were in the list, how long you were likely to be waiting. There's none of that. There's people in the hostel where I am just now who have been there for 2 years and they have no clue when they'll be getting out.
Yeah, right.
And that is totally demoralizing. And like I say, they can't really work until that happens. So their life is essentially on hold.
Yeah. Okay, well, not nice, but yeah, good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else? Got a couple more minutes. I'm happy to wrap up. Yeah, Nick?
Just to echo what's been said about the design of particular websites, you know, not just Edindex, but other essential service websites, government websites, which make it really, really difficult for people to be able to navigate easily and, you know, full of broken links, etc. So I don't know at what level that needs to be addressed, but, you know, when it comes to website design, just making them as accessible as possible, whether you're logging in from your phone or from any device, your desktop or wherever.
I suspect on that one, I mean, I'm hoping to talk to people from the council and things like that over the next week or two. But I suspect on that one, they're going to say that they don't get enough money from central government to update their IT. I mean, that all these councils going bankrupt across the UK, a lot of them are running on IT systems from the 90s. And then they get hacked. Like Hackney Council, where I live, they had a big cybersecurity breach a couple of years ago. And that cost the council a lot of money. So it's kind of self-fulfilling prophecy of false economy of austerity. If you don't invest, then eventually it costs you more down the line. Okay. If no one has anything else they want to chip in now, I'll just have a quick scan through the faces. So what I propose then is that I'll write up the minutes of this meeting, hopefully tonight. So I'll send these slides around. I'll send around what I've got on my notes as well. And then I'll put a few proposal questions up for the next round of interviews. And then I'll make sure that that document can be edited. So anyone who has other questions that they want to put up, they can. And once we've sort of broadly decided that that's a reasonable set of questions for us to take forward, then I'll notify everyone and we'll go back to the spreadsheet and we'll organise some more chats and we'll try. So what I'd suggest is try speaking to people that you haven't already spoken to. And there might be a bit of rehashing of some of the questions from the first round, like, so what's your story, what's your background, that sort of thing. But we'll have some new questions to ask, and then we can have another meeting in about 3 weeks. We are out. Yeah, I think the next meeting is meant to be, if I remember correctly, 12th of October. Yeah, that sounds right. No, that's the Saturday. September 22nd. Anyway, I'll follow up with that. But we have another meeting in about 3 weeks. Does that sort of work for everyone? Any suggestions on how to run that? No? Lots of nodding, so that sounds good. All right.
That should be fine then.
So you'll do the same thing, Mark, where you put out a we can all vote for the best time and
yeah, I'll Moodle everything and I'll try to not Moodle, Doodle poll. Yeah, and I'll try to. So what I'm going to try to do now after this meeting is text all the people with lived experience that we haven't been able to include so far, and just try to reach them. And then if I can get through to them and wrap them back into the process, then I might try to organise a few kind of quick interviews with them to feed into this next round of questions. But I'll try to get the next round of questions out on Monday. And then once we've got that process in train, then I'll also send out the poll for when we want the next meeting. Yeah, but I need to have those people. I need to know whether they want to continue with the process. And then when I set up the poll, I can just call them and say, hey, these are the next few. These are the options for the next meeting. Like, what would suit you? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I've got to learn on my feet a bit with the digital exclusion stuff, but it's interesting. Okay. Cool. Well, thanks very much for your time. That was super enriching for me. I hope it was good for everyone else too. And if
Thank
you
you.
have any feedback on like how I run these things or whatever, and you don't want to share it right now in the group, just feel free to email me. Hopefully, I'm friendly. I take criticism well. Happy to integrate that feedback. All right. Thanks everyone. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks,
Yeah.
everybody.
Thanks,
Bye,
Mark.
everybody. Thank you.